Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to lecture number 12 of CSE 305 Software Requirements Engineering. And in today's lecture we are going to continue on our discussion on requirement elaboration process, or the analysis phase of the requirement engineering process. We talked about that elicitation or inception is the first process within requirement engineering. The second process we talked about was elicitation process, and we said the end product of the elicitation process is the elicited set of requirements that we have gathered through different techniques. For example, through interviews, through observation and social analysis, or through questionnaires and lots of other techniques that we covered. And the problem with elicitation is that when we gather those requirements, then that is just plain text, and to get useful information and to derive functional requirements from it and to gain more understanding about those requirements, we need to do further analysis. We do some analysis checking when we have gathered those requirements after the elicitation phase, but that is just to identify what are the problematical requirements. But when we want to gain deeper understanding of the requirements, for example, when we want to categorize some requirements and we want to figure out that what are the requirements, what are the functionalities that the user desire from a certain within a certain module, and we need to look at what are the similar things in different requirements, and we want to group them together, and we want to do more analysis so that we can identify if there are any conflicts, if there are any inconsistencies. Then we need to do further analysis. And we said that there are different analysis techniques which are available to us as software engineers or as requirement engineers. And in our last lecture we started talking about them. We finished our discussion on the elicitation process. Then we moved to elaboration process, and we said that mainly when we have to elaborate the requirements that we have elicited from the user, there are mainly two approaches. There is this object-oriented approach, and then we have this structured approach. Within the, as these names suggest, you guys must be very familiar with the object-oriented word, and you might have taken a course on object-oriented programming already. And when we say object-oriented, then it sounds that we will be trying to identify some objects, and we will be trying to understand the behavior of that object. And by understanding the behavior, we'll try to understand that how this object is going to perform certain functions, and how it is going to behave when certain functions are applied on it. So within this object-oriented approach, we have multiple modeling methods which we can apply. And during our discussion in this course, within this object-oriented, we are going to discuss mainly three different kinds of modeling approaches. Number one is the scenario-based modeling, and this is the one which we specifically started talking about in our previous lecture. And we said that within this scenario-based modeling, there are four different kinds of things that we can do to analyze requirements. Number one is that we can make use case diagrams. We can also make use case text. We can also make activity diagrams, and we can also make swim lane diagrams. Now if you look at and we started talking about that what is a use case, and we said that we try to identify a scenario. A use case is basically an actor's interaction with the system. And how did we define an actor? So basically we are saying that it's an actor who is trying to interact with this. Okay, and let's assume that this box, this is our system that we have to build for the end user, that we have to build for the client, for which we are trying to gather requirements. And we have identified multiple actors in it, and we are trying to record how certain actors are going to interact with my system, and that is very simply a use case. So basically we say that, okay, we have just one actor, and how is he going to interact with the system? What are the different things that he is going to do with the system? And each one of those things is basically a use case. And each one of these oval shapes, they are basically the use cases. And how did we define an actor? We said that an actor is, so what is an actor? An actor can be a person, it can be another system, or it can be any hardware which is trying to interact with the system. So it can be any role in the organization, it can be a system, or it can be any hardware. Now there were few things that we identified about actors. That, for example, let's consider that example of learning management system, and we are going to make this learning management system for a university. Now a student when we are trying to identify actors, we need to look at the roles. Now, a university might have thousands of students, but if we look at this role student, then we can model this as one actor. So basically, we will, when we're making a use case, we will not be making 13,000 different use cases. We will not be making 13,000 actors if a university has 13,000 actors, but we'll say, okay, a student is a role in this university. Similarly, admin is a role in this university, or controller examination is a role in this university, or faculty is a role in this university. And by identifying the roles, we try to identify actors. Similarly, if the university has any other legacy systems which they still want to use with this new learning management system, then how that system is going to supply some information to the system, that is also then that also becomes an actor. Similarly, if there is any hardware, for example, you have these biometric devices installed in different in your campus at different places, and whenever a faculty comes in, then they have to mark their attendances on it. And now that is a machine that is also, and let's say that once a faculty member is in the university and he is signed in through that biometric device, his status is in campus on that learning management system. So there is an interaction between that hardware, and so that is also an actor. So an actor is a machine, it's a system, or a person or a role who is trying to interact with the system. Then there were a few things which we said about identifying use cases. Now, how do we go about it? For example, what we try to do is we try to model a scenario. We try to think of a scenario, and we have already discussed this word scenario, especially when we were discussing elicitation techniques, and we said that one of the techniques is scenarios, that we try to identify scenarios in a client's environment. So what is a scenario? For example, I am a student and I have supplied my username and password, and I'm trying to check my marks on the portal or on the learning management system for a specific course. Now, what I would do is I would log into the system. I would enter my username, password. I would press login. Then I would select the course for whose marks I want to see. Then once I am in that course, I will say, okay, I want to see my assignment marks. I will click on that, and then the assignment marks would be displayed, and then I would guess whether I want to take a print out of it or I just want to see and then close it. There can be different options. Now, how do we let's say we have the scenario. Now, how do we make a use case from this scenario? Now, if you guys remember from our discussion on scenarios, that we said that in every scenario there is an initial state of the system, then there is some normal flow of events, and then there is an ending state of the system when the scenario is complete. So when we are modeling a use case, we always think about what is the normal flow of events. Okay. And what we try to do is we try to record all the normal flow of events. That is the first thing we do when we are modeling a use case, when we are writing use case text. And then what we try to do, we try to look at each one of those events, and we try to figure out if there is any exception or is there any possible variation that can occur in any one of these steps. And then we also try to identify those. Now, one thing that becomes very clear with this, that during elicitation we just record those scenarios. Okay, for example, a student checking marks. Now that is a requirement that we have identified. Now, when we do further analysis, and let's say when we try to make a use case of this particular scenario, and when we try to write use case text of this scenario, we identify different scenarios. So we try to identify a group of scenarios. So we can say basically a use case can be used to represent multiple scenarios. For example, the use case text, it is used to represent multiple scenarios, and you can see that how much more detail you extract about this particular requirement from this just use case, modeling this use case and modeling use case text. So that's why this analysis process or this elaboration process is helpful, that once we get to model our requirements in detail, for example using the scenario based modeling, we identify different roles in the system, and we try to identify how these roles are going to change the state of my system, how they are going to use certain services within the system, and when they are going to use or when they are going to supply some information, how the system is going to react to it, and what would be the end product, and what are the possible variations when they do different interactions with the system. So that is the beauty of analysis, that we gain more information and we gain more, or we develop more understanding about the requirements, which would be required once we have to, before we have to, because elaboration is followed by specification, and if we do not have this understanding, we will not be able to specify requirements correctly. And in today's lecture, we are going to build on our discussion on the scenario-based modeling, but there were few other object-oriented approaches as well, which we just mentioned or which we named in our previous lecture, and those were class-based modeling and behavioral modeling. And what we do in class-based modeling is we try to identify domain classes, and we will have a discussion on this on one of our lectures. And similarly, what we do in behavioral modeling is that we try to model behavior of those domain classes, and we try to identify how these classes are going to behave on the basis of certain events. So, for example, one of the possible diagrams that we can make are state diagrams. And then there is a whole different category of a whole different approach which can be used for elaboration, and that was structured analysis or the structured approach. And we said that in the structured approach we try to identify what kind of data is flowing through my system and how this data is transformed from a certain input form to an output, and what processes are applied on this data to get that particular output. So these two were the main approaches, and we started our discussion with the object-oriented approach, and we started talking about scenario-based modeling, and within scenario-based modeling we discussed use case diagrams and use case text, and we tried to figure out that how this can help us develop more understanding about certain scenarios. And in today's lecture we are going to continue our discussion on use case diagrams, some of the notations that we were recapping in our last lecture. We'll continue with that, and we will, towards the end of the lecture, we will move towards activity diagrams and swim lane diagrams, that how they are helpful in this analysis phase of the requirement engineering process, or this analysis process of the requirement engineering process. If you guys remember, when we towards the end of our last lecture, we said that that this is how we represent an actor in a use case, and this is a generally acceptable notation used for actor in different modeling environments. But you can also have this box with a classifier which basically mentions that this is an actor. And similarly, you can have your own customized icons. For example, there are some servers which are trying to, who are trying to interact with a system. Now you can have this particular icon which shows that these are servers, and they are also an actor. So there are different symbols that you can use to identify that these are the actors of the system. Now, one word that I've used repeatedly when talking about the scenario-based modeling is that we try to identify how the actors are interacting with our system. And one of the things about this scenario-based modeling is that it helps us in understanding the scope of the system. Okay, because one thing that we do when we are modeling these use case diagrams is that we identify our system boundary. Okay. And anything outside the system boundary, it means that those things which are outside this boundary, they do not belong to the system. So all the things, for example, there is a legacy system. Now all the functionalities that are in that system, they are not part of this particular system. So we try to identify a boundary, and we say anything and everything that is inside that boundary, this is the system that I have to produce, and we only try to identify the actors interacting with that particular boundary. So by definition, use cases capture the functionality of a particular subject. Anything not realized by the subject is considered outside the system boundary and should be modeled as an actor. So anything that is outside the subject that we are basically trying to model, so we say that is an actor, because anything that is outside, it will either be an external system, it will either be a role, or it will be external hardware. So we are not concerned with how that is working, because that is outside our boundary. So this technique is very useful in determining the scope and assigning responsibilities when designing a system, subsystem, or component. So as I said, one of the biggest problems with software project is that is that we do not define a bounded scope. Okay, and the scope definition is not such that we can identify what are the different modules, what are the different boundaries of different modules. So by using this kind of approach, it is really helpful, because it tells us that this is the boundary of my system, and this is how much I would do as a developer, or this is how much our company has to provide. This is how much functionality we have to provide to our client. So this is very helpful in determining the scope of the system. So for example, if we are modeling that ATM system, now the design discussions deviate into discussion of details of the back-end banking system. Okay, whereas if we look at the particular use case diagram, then we can actually see that that the banking system is an actor. Okay, and that is outside our discussion because we cannot control it. For example, we're talking about this ATM system, and whatever is happening at the bank side, for example, the user has supplied his PIN code, and that is being processed, and then user says, okay, I want to withdraw 10,000 rupees, and that transaction is being taken care by the bank. Now if the bank server is down or something happens there, now that is something which is not being provided by this particular ATM system. That is some problem with the banking system. Now that is not part of this particular that is not something that we need to care about as a software designer or as a requirement analyst when we are making this particular ATM system. So it is very important that we represent the system boundaries, and this is something that we do in use case diagram. Now let's look at this example of this ATM. Now if you look at this example, then we say that this is my ATM system, and what we have done here is by drawing this rectangle, we have said that this is the boundary of my subject, which is ATM system, and everything that is going to be inside this box, that is what I have to worry about, and this is what I have to model as a requirement engineer or as an analyst, and this is my system boundary. And these are my use cases. So anything that is happening outside this boundary, I'm not concerned with it because I don't have to actually do it. I just have to understand that how that thing which is outside this boundary is actually interacting with my system. So for example, there are two actors here. One is the bank client, which is the user of this particular ATM machine, and then this banking system which we talked about. Now, as I said in the previous slide that at times when you're designing your systems, you spend too much time worrying about the things which you do not have to do. So for example, let's say you were designing the system and you were involved in a discussion about the banking system or design of the banking system. Now that is something that you don't need to worry about because this is not part of this subject, which is the ATM system, and because it is not part of this subject and this is outside the boundary, so we have shown this as an actor. So this is an actor as well. This is also an actor. So just remember that anything which is not concerned with the subject, we put it outside the boundary and we treat it as an actor, because even if we are taking some information from it or we are supplying some information to it, it is just an interaction. Okay. So for example, within this ATM system, we say that a user is going to withdraw funds, and when he is going to withdraw funds, there would be an interaction with the banking system, because for example, you need to, for example, you say that you want to withdraw 10,000 rupees and you do not have the right balance in your account to withdraw that kind of money. So again, you might have to wait. So bank would say, okay, you do not have sufficient balance. So that information is basically sent to the bank, and then there is an input from the bank as well. So there is an interaction with the banking system. But the implementation is not our concern because we are only concerned about building this ATM system. And similarly, when the bank client says that I want to deposit some funds, there is again going to be an interaction between deposit funds and the banking system. Okay, and there will be a confirmation as well that certain amount is being deposited to your account. And for example, after depositing, let's say you want to check your balance, and when you are checking your balance, again there is a transaction between you between the ATM system and the banking system. But as a requirement analyst, where you are trying to gather requirement for a particular ATM system, this is your boundary and you are not concerned about what is happening outside. Now, as I said, that this is a very useful technique for bounding the scope of your system or bounding the scope of the problem, which is one of the biggest problems with managing software projects, and this is one of the biggest cause of software project failures, that you do not have a bounded scope. And you have, normally there are lots of problems with the scope, for example, overscoping and scope creep, those problems result with because initially you didn't identify the boundaries, and what happened, the scope went on increasing and increasing, and it came to a point where your project is either a failure or you end up spending too much time and too much money on it. So identifying the boundaries of your system is very, very important, and if we model these use case diagrams correctly, then these are also helpful in identifying those boundaries and limiting your scope. So do not forget to model system boundaries when you are making these use case diagrams, and as an analyst this is very important. Okay, then there were a few other symbols which we saw in our previous lectures, and one of them was this include relationship. These lines in this use case, these are different kind of interactions. Okay, so we saw that there are two main kind of interactions. There is one, this straight line, and then there is this broken line with an arrow. Normally with these these are called the normal interactions, which is just a solid line between an actor and a use case. This is just a normal interaction, and it does not give any direction. It just says that this actor is going to interact with the system, through this particular interaction. Now, what is this include relationship? The include relationship occurs when you have a chunk of behavior that is similar across more than one use case, and you don't want to keep copying the description of that behavior. Okay. So for example, if you remember that trader example, so when our trader is analyzing risk and when he is looking at any price deal, now both these use cases, they include this valuation use case. Okay. Now by modeling this valuation as one, what we are doing is that we are including this behavior of this valuation in this use case, and we are also including it here as well. So we are kind of using another principle of object oriented, which is kind of saying reuse, where we are capturing lots of information in one use case, and we are saying, okay, we don't have to do it again and again. We can use it. If we just model it once, we can adopt that behavior in multiple use cases, or we can use that behavior in multiple use cases. So as I said, that both these use cases, analyze risk and price deal, require you to rate the deal and or evaluate the deal. So by putting it in one place, both these use cases are able to include this functionality within them. So whenever you have something which can be so if you have a chunk of functionality which you have to use in multiple cases, so it is always advisable to use this include relationship between two use cases. Another kind of relationship which we saw in our last lecture was this generalization relationship, which is shown by this particular interaction, and it is so when we use this generalization relationship. So for example, we have two use cases which are very similar to each other, but we have one use case which does a bit more. So for example, in this particular example, this capture deal is similar to this limit exceeds, okay, but it also have this functionality of limit exceeds, but it does a bit more. It also captures the deal. So this generalization relationship, it actually indicates that this particular use case, it does a bit more. And this is another beautiful way of identifying all different scenarios, that what are the different things that are going to happen in my system, and you can encapsulate different kind of functionalities into different use cases. And this is very similar to the parent class and the child class relationship that we have in when we model these class diagrams, and we say that the parent classes can have some more functionality. For example, you have a class a person, and from that person class you basically inherit multiple classes. Then there would be a generalization relationship from all those child classes to that parent class. For example, we have this one class which we call a person, and so let's say this is the parent class, and then we have different classes which have this generalization relationship to this, and we will say, okay, this student is a person, faculty is a person. So what we are trying to do is saying here that this is my generalized class, but these classes they have some more information in them. Okay, so that is another thing that we can use in a use case diagram, that we can have these generalization interaction between different use cases. The one thing that is very interesting, which for us to understand here in these use case diagrams, that whenever an actor is going to interact with the system, he is always going to interact with this normal interaction. So whenever two use cases are going to interact with each other, then we have to define what kind of interaction that is, and there are three possible kind of interactions. We have include relationship, we have generalization, and the third one is extension. And let's see what extension is about. So this is very similar to generalization, but with more rules to it. With this construct, the extending use case may add behavior to the base use case, but this time the base use case must declare certain extension points. So for example, we are saying that this is our base use case, and this is the extending use case. Okay, so what we are saying that this extending use case is going to extend the behavior of this my buy a product use case. Okay, but if it was generalization, then the difference would have been that we would have had this kind of interaction, and we didn't need to define these extension points if it was generalization. But because it is extension, so we are saying that, you know, this extending use case, it is actually extending the behavior of my use case, but I'm also mentioning that at what points it is actually extending the behavior. So for example, if it's a regular customer, okay, then for a regular customer we already have this payment information and shipping information. So we are saying that if it's a regular customer, then extend this use case at these extension points. So what would happen is that when the system is going to be functional, then we would know that so it actually is telling us that whenever somebody or an actor is actually buying a product, then you need to check that if that person is a regular client, then you already have the payment and shipping information. So by default, these values should be used. But if the client says, no, okay, I want to give a different shipping information, or my payment information is not changed, or is changed, or if somebody is a new user, then maybe this extension might not occur. So this is very important that to realize the difference between extension and generalization. Both of them, they add some functionality to the base use case, but the difference is that in extension we have some further rules, and we also tell that what are the extension points for a particular use case. Moreover, a use case may have extension points, and extending use case makes in one or more of these extension points. You indicate which ones on the line between the use case on the diagram. So both generalization and extend allow you to split up a use case when it is getting too complicated. So another advantage of using generalization and extension is that we can split the use case. If we realize that there is too much functionality in this use case, then we can split it. And another thing is, another notation which is recommended is that whenever we are using this extend relationship, then we should also mention that what are the extension points. So we need to write that at which points we are going to extend this base use case. These are certain rules that we need to think about when to use include, when to use generalization, and when to use extension, because I've seen my student getting confused about these different kind of interactions between use cases. So we need to use include when you are repeating yourself in two or more separate use cases and you want to avoid repetition. Okay, so as I said, that there is a certain set of functionality that different use cases, that you are repeating in a use case diagram. So you don't want to repeat it. You put it in one use case and you say, okay, different use cases who needs that particular functionality, they can include that particular use case. Okay, and then we have generalization. So use generalization when you are describing a variation on normal behavior and you wish to describe it casually. Okay, so for example, if you guys remember our generalization example, that we were saying capture deal, but within capture deal we have this base functionality of limit exceed as well, so that we can only capture the deal if our limit is not exceeded. So it is using that base functionality, but it is doing a bit more. So we are mentioning this generalization relationship, and we use extend when we are describing a variation on normal behavior and you wish to use the more controlled form, declaring your extension points in your base use case. So do remember that normally when an actor is interacting with a use case, that is normally just a plain interaction. So this is our normal interaction. But then there are three different possibilities. You can have include, you can have generalization, and you can have extension. Include avoids repetition. So for example, there is this use case and we have another use case, and both of these use cases, they want to use certain functionality which we have, so rather than repeating this functionality here for this use case and here for this case, what we do is we try to put this whole functionality in one use case and we say, okay, this is going to include this use case and this is also going to include this. So what we are saying is we are trying to avoid repetition. But let's say that this base use case, this can be this has some functionality, but it is building on some base use case. So it is building on the functionality that was here. So we are saying, okay, it is doing this, but it also has this functionality. Or similarly, we can also show that extend relationship. We can say that this particular use case will be extended at a certain point. So there are different kind of interactions that we can use to to identify different kind of behavior of the use cases, and as we said that this is part of this object-oriented approach of analyzing requirements, and we can see that we are using different constructs which you are familiar with in object-oriented programming. For example, we were using generalization, we are using include, where we are saying that we are including different functionality which is being done somewhere, and we are saying that we do not want repetition, so we are using include to put all that functionality, and we are avoiding repetition. Similarly, we are also extending the behavior, and in extend we are saying that we are also clearly mentioning that at what points we are extending the functionality or behavior of a base use case. So these are some general guidelines, that use include when you want to avoid repetition, use generalization when you are describing a variation on your normal behavior, and use extension where you want to where you are trying to describe a variation or normal behavior, but you also want it to be more controlled. You also want to specify that at what point this variation might occur in the normal behavior. So that is the difference between extension and generalization. So let's also talk about the format and guidelines to writing use cases. I know that we have seen this this kind of format earlier as well, but let's look at this one example for the withdraw cash use case from the ATM machine. So one thing, there are certain fields that you guys would see, and as a requirement analyst, whenever you are modeling use case and you're writing use case text, you need to figure that what fields are important for you. So the fields which I mentioned here, they are recommended, but you can always add more, and you can delete some of these if you think that they are not important for the system that you're trying to model. So number one, we have this use case ID. So we should always enter a unique numeric identifier for the use case. For example, we can use these identifiers of the form which is mentioned here, UC 1.2.1, or you can have your own notation for that matter. Then you should write a use case name. For example, in this particular case, we are saying withdraw cash is the use case name. So what is an actor? An actor is a person or other external entity to the software system being specified who interacts with the system and perform use cases to accomplish tasks. Different actors often correspond to different use cases or roles identified from the customer community that will use the product. Name the actor that will be initiating this use case primary, and any other actors who will participate in completing the use case secondary. So if you guys remember the withdraw cash example, or for that particular ATM system, now in that particular scenario, who do you think is the primary actor of the system, and who is the secondary actor? Now let me draw it for you, and I want you to actually think about it. So for example, we know that there are two actors. We have this user, or let's say the client, the bank client, and we have this banking system, and we are saying that he is trying to withdraw cash. Now if you see this particular use case diagram, that we can see that both these actors, they are interacting with the system. Now which one of these is the primary actor and which one is the secondary actor? I want you to think about it. I hope you were able to identify that the user who is actually trying to withdraw cash, he is actually initiating this particular scenario, or he is initiating this particular interaction, so he is the primary actor, he or she is the primary actor, whereas the banking system here, that is the secondary actor. So that is also something that we need to mention when we are writing use case text, that who are the actors and who are the primary actors and who is the secondary actor. Then we need to write a brief description. Okay, And what this brief description it should include what are the reasons of this particular use case and what are the outcomes for this particular use case. So for example, withdraw cash is required because that is one of the main functionalities of the ATM system, and similarly the outcome would be that the ATM machines, it basically withdraws some cash. And similarly, if a user has put certain cash which is more than the balance that he or she has in his bank account, then the machine should also display some error message as well. And similarly, another output can be that a cash receipt would be generated as well. So what are the triggers? Another thing that we try to mention within a use case diagram are triggers. Identify the event that initiates this use case. This could be an external business event or a system event that causes the use case to begin, or it could be the first step in the normal flow. For example, when we are trying to withdraw cash, the first step in the normal flow is the user pressing that he wants to withdraw cash. Now, and let's imagine that the precondition for this particular use case is that the user has already supplied the correct PIN information. So a trigger is what initiates a particular interaction. So we need to record that as well. Next, what we have in use case text are preconditions. So list any activities that must take place or any conditions that must be true before the use case can be started. Number each precondition. For example, customer has active deposit account with ATM privileges. Customer has an activated ATM card. Now, we can also number them. If we have multiple preconditions, then we need to number them. And similarly, we can have post conditions. So describe the state of the system at the conclusion of the use case execution. Should include both minimal guarantees, what must happen if the actor's goal is not achieved, and the success guarantees. What happens when the actor goal is achieved, number each condition. For example, customer receives cash, customer account balance is reduced by the amount of the withdrawal and the transaction fee. Now, there is something interesting about post conditions. If you guys remember our discussion on scenarios, then I just want to link all these things together. That we said that in a scenario, we always have some precondition, or we call it the initial state. And then we have some normal flow of events, some things that we do, and then we have this final state. Now, because if you remember that we said that what we do when we are modeling a use case, we identify a scenario, and we also try to model the variations on this scenario. For example, there's a variation here which makes it a totally new scenario, and then there is a variation here which makes another scenario. So there are multiple possible states. So for example, in case of this withdrawing cash, so you can have one set of preconditions which would be true for all these alternative scenarios as well. But the post conditions, they would depend on what events occurred when the scenario was actually happening. So for example, you also need to identify the minimal guarantee, which is what would happen if the transaction was not successful. For example, you're trying to withdraw cash, and the machine says that you do not have sufficient balance. Okay. Now, if you also need to mention that here, that an error message would be displayed if the user does not have sufficient balance, or an error message would be displayed if the banking system is down. But the two things which I mentioned here, they are basically for the success. These are the success guarantees, that the customer receives cash and the customer balance is reduced. Another post condition that can be written here is that a receipt is generated. Okay, so be careful when you are mentioning these post conditions. Now, also try to when we are discussing these things, you should always keep in our mind that we are discussing the use case text and the use case diagrams from a requirement analyst point of view. We are not just trying to learn use case diagram and use case text, because I'm sure that you have already gone through that. So as a designer or as an analyst of this particular system, what we wanted to understand was that when a customer is trying to withdraw cash, then what are the things that our machine, what are the functionalities that our machine should have, or what are the kind of error messages, or what are the kind of conditions that we need to think about when somebody is trying to withdraw cash, or at what stages do we need to talk to the secondary actor, that is the banking system. So if we look at these preconditions and post conditions, then it helps us in identifying all those things, including the other things that we are discussing in the use case. So always think of as a requirement analyst that, okay, I was analyzing this requirement and I started modeling this use case text. Now, which information is actually necessary for me to actually identify different alternatives? So this is very interesting. Just remember that you are looking at this use case text and this use case diagram as a requirement analyst. So next we have the next section that we have in a use case text is the normal flow. So what does normal flow tells us about? It provides a detailed description of the user actions and the system responses that will take place during execution of the use case under normal expected conditions. This dialog sequence will ultimately lead to accomplishing the goal stated in the use case name and the description. So let's look at what are the normal flow of events in this withdraw cash use case. So the first thing that a user would do, he would enter an ATM card. So that is the first event. The second event is the customer enters PIN number. Third event is the system prompts the user to enter his or her language preference. For example, whether you prefer English, Spanish, Urdu, whatever. Then at number 4, we have system validates if the customer is in the bank network. System prompts user to select transaction type. If I'm sure all of us are familiar with using ATM machines, and there are different transactions that you can do. You can check your balance, you can withdraw cash, you can deposit amount, you can pay your electricity bills or utility bills, you can transfer money into other bank accounts. So you can do you can check your balances. So you can do multiple transactions. So system is going to prompt you to select your transaction. Then the customer selects withdrawal from withdrawal form checking, and the system prompts the user to enter the withdrawal amount. Okay, and then there are certain things that are going to have. If the amount is withdrawn, then the ATM is going to display that your transaction was successful, and your cash would be, the machine would eject your card along with the receipt and the cash if you initially selected that whether you want a receipt for this particular transaction or not. That is another prompt that can be in one of those normal flow of events. Now these normal flow, what they suggest is that if these are the events, if they occur in this order and this fashion, then what would happen? My use case would be a success. Okay. So, and the post condition would be that the customer has got cash, his balance has been reduced, and he's got his ATM card, and he's also been generated a receipt. But we said that in a use case we can have some variations as well, and these variations are mentioned under these alternate flows. So document legitimate branches from the main flow to handle special conditions. These are called special conditions, variations, or extensions in a use case. For each alternate flow, reference the benchmarking, the branching step number. So this is very important that when we are mentioning alternatives, we need to mention the original event. So for example, we had numbers from 1 to 9 in the normal flow, and if we have an alternate at number 3, then we need to number the same here. So we are saying that there is an alternate flow to number 3. So for each alternate flow, reference the branching step number of the normal flow and the condition which must be true in order for this extension to be executed. Okay. So for example, alternate flows in the withdraw cash transaction are 4A. In step 4 of the normal flow, if the customer is not in the bank network, okay, then what would happen? System will prompt the customer to accept network fee. Customer accept, use case resumes on step 5. And then there is another alternate. In step 4 of the normal flow, if the customer is not in the bank network, system will prompt customer to accept network fee. Customer declines, transaction is terminated, use case resumes on step 9 of the normal flow. So just imagine what kind of information this whole analysis is actually giving us. It is actually telling us a lot about the functionality and the behavior of the system. Okay, and this is what we are interested in as a requirement analyst. We want to know that when somebody is actually withdrawing cash, then what are the things that can happen, and what are the kind of constraints that we want to put on our system, and what are the functionality that our system should provide to the end user. So within alternate flows, what we do is we try to identify that if there are any alternates that are going to happen in a normal flow, then then it means that there would be certain branches, and there would be some extensions, or there would be some alternate scenarios. We need to give the same branching number. For example, we are saying that if we look at the normal flow, the number 4 was system validates if the customer is in the bank network. Now there are different alternatives here that one alternate is that the customer is not in the banking network, and the bank says, okay, do you want to accept the network fee? If he accepts it, then the use case would resume at number 5. So use case would resume at this number 5. Whereas if the customer declines, then the use case would resume at this step 9, where the system is going to eject the ATM card, because the customer the transaction would end and the ATM card would be returned. So this is what alternative flows actually tells us. Then we can also have exceptions in a use case. So what are exceptions? They describe any anticipated error conditions that could occur during execution of the use cases. So for example, we have that normal flow of events. We look at all those normal flow events and we try to identify, okay, what are the possible things that can go wrong in these normal flow of events. So for example, let's look at these normal flow of events. So we have the customer inserts the ATM card. One thing that can go wrong here is that you enter the card in the wrong orientation. Okay, so for example, you need to have enter the card with chip upwards or downwards, and your orientation is wrong. So that is an error. Similarly, you enter the PIN number that is wrong. So you need to think about all these exceptions, and when we are writing exceptions, we need to identify all these possible errors that can occur. So what we have here in exceptions, for example, in step 2 of the normal flow, if the customer enters an invalid PIN number, okay, so the transaction is disapproved, message to the customer to re-enter PIN number. So for example, you enter a PIN number, then the ATM usually prompts you to enter a PIN number a certain number of times. Okay, customer enters the correct PIN number, use case resumes on step 3 of the normal flow. If you enter your PIN number at the second time correctly, you basically resume your use case at the next step. But normally, what another thing that should have been written here maybe was that, which is a functionality which is very common to these ATM machines, that if you keep on entering your PIN number incorrectly a certain number of times, your basically ATM card is not returned by the machine. Okay, because that is kind of a safety check that, for example, you have a stolen ATM card and you are just trying to guess the PIN number. Okay, and if you keep on entering it incorrectly more than certain number of times, then your ATM card is not returned, and you have to go to actually the branch to actually claim your ATM card back if it is actually yours. So that should have been mentioned here, maybe in exceptions. And similarly, as I said, there can be exception in step 1 in the normal flow, in the first event in your normal flow, that is enter the ATM card. And as I said, that orientation of the card is very important when we are entering it into the ATM machine. So there can be an exception here that, for example, you enter the ATM card with your chip downwards, and you need to mention that your transaction is declined and your ATM card is ejected, and the machine will display an error that enter the ATM card in this particular fashion, and then you enter the card with chip upwards, and then your use case would start at the resume at step 2. Then you can have certain includes, and what are these includes? It lists any other use cases that are included by this use case. Common functionality that appears in multiple use cases can be split out into separate use cases that is included by the ones that need that common functionality. For example, steps 1 to 4 in the normal flow would be required for all types of ATM transactions. A use case could be written for these steps and included in all ATM use cases. For example, what are these step 1 to 4? That you enter your ATM card. So for example, customer inserting an ATM card, entering the PIN number, selecting a language, and bank validation. These 4 steps, these are common to all the use cases. So what we can do is we can make this one use case and we can put it in all the use cases. So every use case is actually going to include that functionality. So if you remember that include interaction, so what we would have is that whenever you will select a transaction type, then you will include that functionality. When you're withdrawing cash, you are actually including that functionality. So for example, so what include indicates is that what are the common interactions which multiple use cases are going to use. So let's look at this again. That for example, in this R case of withdraw cash, 1 to 4 in the normal flow would be required for all types of ATM transactions. For example, we are checking our balance, we are withdrawing our cash, we are depositing cash. All of them are going to actually use that step to 1 to 4. So what we can say is that it includes these 4 steps. So we can do that as well. So you can also have some special requirements in a use case text. What are these special requirements? They identify any additional requirements such as non-functional requirements for the use case that may need to be addressed during design or implementation. These may include performance requirements or other quality attributes. Now, if we again look at this example of withdraw cash, then what you might have experienced at times using these ATM machines is that you said you want to withdraw cash and you have requested for a certain transaction, and what happens is that there needs to be a communication between withdraw cash and the banking system, and at times the banking server is down. Now what happens is that the ATM machine, it tries to connect to the banking server, but after a certain while it says that your transaction has timed out and the ATM is not able to process your transaction. Now why does that happen? Because you cannot wait there forever waiting for your ATM card inserted in the ATM machine. So normally there is a qualitative or there is a quality constraint or the performance requirement put there that if the ATM machine or if the ATM system is not being able to connect to the server of let's say, I don't know, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, then you display that particular message that it was your transaction has timed out. So this is so when we are mentioning these special requirements, normally use cases are used to identify the functionalities, how the user what kind of functionalities would be provided to the user. But we can also have some special performance requirements which can be identified when we are writing these use case text. Then you can also have certain assumptions. So you need to write all the assumptions that you have. For example, why the use of the Spanish or English or Urdu language? Because you know that the possible users of this system, because if the machine is to be deployed in Pakistan, then one of the language preferences should include Urdu as well. So you would have Urdu or English, okay? Because the user, they understand these two languages. Then you can also have some notes and issues. For example, if there are any things that are still not clear, for example, to be determined. For example, you have identified this special requirement that what is the timeout, how much an ATM system should wait before it actually displays that message that your transaction has timed out. Now, if you have not actually determined it, you would say, okay, this needs to be determined. So you can also put some notes about certain, for example, there is a normal flow of event and you have identified that there is an exception that might occur in a certain event. Now what course of action you should take, and you have not actually decided it yet, so you would say, okay, this 1A needs to be determined, or then where the use case would resume, it needs to be determined, and these kind of things. So you can add some additional notes and issues which are still open, which you need to discuss further. Okay, so just to quickly recap, what are the things that you can have in a use case text? So we can, so starting with the use case ID, you can have use case name, you can have list of actors where you identify who is the primary actor who initiated this particular interaction. Then you write a brief description. Then you try to mention the trigger, that how this use case would actually start. You mention some preconditions, some post conditions. You try to mention the normal flow of events, and you mention alternate flows. Alternate flows, these are extensions, whereas you can also have some exceptions as well, which are some error messages, or what are the things that can go wrong in those normal flow of events. You can also have some includes. You can include some special requirements which will help you identify and identify some performance requirements or some constraints put on certain functionalities that you've identified in this use case. Similarly, you can have some assumptions, or you can also put some additional notes, and you can also have some open issues which you can mention there. Let's quickly look at another example of use case. And if you guys remember, we said that within this scenario-based modeling, we can also draw some other kind of diagrams, and those diagrams was activity diagrams and the swim lane diagrams. So let's take our discussion from the use case diagram to those activity diagrams and those swim lane diagrams. Now this example is taken from the software engineering book and by Roger Pressman, a practitioner's approach to software engineering. And this example says that there is this actor which is this homeowner, and the homeowner, he is trying to access the camera, and this is a system where a homeowner is basically trying to have multiple cameras deployed in his home, and he can actually it is an intruder alert system. Where you can monitor you have installed multiple cameras in your home, and you want to access those different cameras through internet. You can configure your system, you can set the alarm time, and so on and so forth. So there are two kind of actors here. You have this homeowner and you have cameras, and a homeowner can access the cameras. He can configure the system, he can set alarms, and similarly when you are accessing these cameras, then cameras, this use case has an interaction with this the camera as well. So this is the secondary actor in this particular use case. Now, if you guys remember those alternate scenarios discussion, then in a use case we have said that there are some normal flow of events, and similarly there can be some alternatives as well. So whenever we model a use case, it is very important to identify those alternatives, because this gives us actually more information about behavior of the system, or how my system is going to behave if if actor is trying to do some interact with the system in a certain way, what are the different possibilities? So identifying alternatives is very important, and one of the very good diagrams that can be used to show these alternatives or show the behavior of the system when this alternative occurs is the activity diagram and the swim lane diagram. So let's look at this particular use case example and try to understand how activity diagrams can help us understand this particular these alternatives in this use case more clearly. So what are these alternate actions? Can the actor take some other action at a certain point? So you have certain normal flow. You try to imagine, okay, is there any other alternative that can occur at this particular normal flow? Is it possible that the actor will encounter some error condition at this point? So you have those exceptions and you have those alternatives, both of them. Is it possible the actor will encounter behavior invoked by some event outside the actor's control? So there are three possibilities of alternates. Number one is you have certain alternate scenario. Number two is you encounter an error. Number three is that some external behavior occurred which would mean that you need to take an alternative action. So so remember that a use case where the user was trying to access the camera. Now this is an activity diagram trying to identify different alternatives in that particular use case. So what would the user do? The first activity that user would perform is he or she would try to enter his password and user ID. Now there are two possibilities here. If the password is valid, then this is the normal flow of events in this use case. So if the password is valid, then he selects the major function. For example, he selects surveillance. Okay. Now if you look at these boxes, these are called the decision nodes. Okay. So for example, in a normal flow of events, when we were writing this use case text, we said that the first thing that when the user is trying to use this particular safe home system is that he enters the user ID and password. Now when we are reading this normal flow of events, we say, okay, there is something which can go wrong here. If he forgets his user ID and password, then there is an alternative path. So we can use this decision box to show multiple decisions that that can happen at this stage, because when somebody is supplying information on which the system has to take a decision, then based on the information supplied, the decision can be different. If the user ID and password are valid, then you resume and you go to step 2. But if it's not, then you go to step 2A, because you would say that you prompt for re-entry. And if the user enters the password, so you basically you enter again, and your use case is resumed at 1. Okay. If you enter the user ID and password correctly again, then you go to step 2, or you come back to 2A again. And again, you can have that condition, you can have that performance or quality constraint here, that if a user keeps on entering user ID and password incorrect 4 times, 5 times, then the system will not allow him to enter user ID and password. Okay. Similarly, you go to step 2, then you have the step 3, which is the select the surveillance function. What do you want to do? Now you have two possibilities in the system. You can either view, for example, you have 4 cameras installed. You can have this thumbnail view where you are seeing all the 4 cameras. So for example, you have this cam 1, you have cam 2, you have cam 3, and you have cam 4, and you can have this thumbnail view, or you can select a particular camera. So for example, you can say I just want to view cam 1. Okay. Now again, there is a decision happening here. So either based on what you select, whether you select a thumbnail view, or for example, the normal flow of events says that whenever you select surveillance, then it shows this thumbnail view. Okay. Now there might be an alternative that a user say, no, I want to look at a specific camera. So there is a 4A, and then you resume that. You basically resume at 5. If it's a thumbnail view, then you will get the feed from all the cameras. Whereas if you select a particular camera, then you will only get the feed from that particular camera. Okay. And similarly, then step 6 is that you prompt for another view. Okay. And if you want to see another camera, you are going to go back and you are going to resume at step 3 again, or you are going to exit this function. Now we have already seen this, that when we write the use case text, then we actually model this behavior, or we actually document this behavior. But we do not actually but as a designer, we want to also know that in what order these things would be happening. And one thing that we mentioned in the use case text is that we use the same reference number. For example, there is an alternative at 2, so we mention it at a 2A. So 2A is saying that there was a number 2, but there is an alternative to it, which is 2A. Okay, so we have this referencing, but these activity diagrams, they are very helpful. They actually tells us that what are the normal flow of events. It tells that what are the decision points in this whole scenario. So similarly, activity diagrams have some other elements which is this construct, and this construct is also very useful. It is used to control or to show concurrency. So for example, there are lots of activities which, for example, let's say we have this particular activity and it actually wants to wait, and it cannot start unless and until it has input from all these activities. Now we can use this symbol, and this would actually block the inputs, and once all these inputs are there, then the input will be passed to here. Similarly, we can use this to supply this output to multiple activities. So this is, if it is used in this particular scenario, we call it that it is used as joining, but here it will be called that it is actually forking that input to multiple outputs, to multiple activities. So activity diagram, we are not, again, the purpose here in this course, when we are discussing these activity diagrams, we are not actually trying to understand what an activity diagram is, but we are trying to understand how an activity diagram is helpful for an analyst. Now, so our discussion would be pretty brief on activity diagrams, because we have seen that when we write this use case text, then we try to identify all those alternatives. Okay, and we have identified it, but making an activity diagram of that gives us an alternate representation as well, which is kind of helpful in understanding how my system is going to behave, and what are the decision nodes, and what are the decisions that I'm going to take at those particular decision points. So in our lecture today, we continued with our discussion on elaboration sub-process of the requirements engineering process, and in that we said that there are mainly two kinds of elaboration approaches. One is the object-oriented approach and the structured approach, and within that object-oriented approach, we have concluded our discussion on scenario-based modeling, and we have said that scenario-based modeling, within the scenario-based modeling, we can make use case diagrams, we can write use case text, we can make activity diagrams, and I was not able to show you swimlane diagram today. I will try to show it in the next lecture, but the purpose here is that we try to identify the functionalities of the system from the user's point of view. So we have a user, and we try to record the scenario from the user point of view, that how a user is going to play with my system or interact with the system, and what should be the behavior of my system when the user tries to interact with the system. Okay, so the use cases are a very useful tool or a method to analyze the requirements that we have gathered, and we have seen that it not only helps us in identifying mainly the functional requirements, but it is also helpful in identifying the non-functional requirement at times. As we saw that when we write use case text, we can also have some special requirements where we can put some quality or quality constraints, or we can also mention some performance requirements. So this is a very helpful tool, and again, one thing that you should remember here is that the purpose of including these use cases and activity diagrams and swimlane diagrams are that I'm sure that you have covered these topics in detail on your software engineering courses, but what we are doing here is that we are trying to understand that as a requirement analyst, how can I use these diagrams to analyze my system in a better fashion. So in the next lecture, we are going to start our discussion with with another object-oriented approach, and specifically we are going to talk about class-based modeling, and how we identify domain classes from the elicited requirements, and how it helps us in understanding the elicited requirements and taking us towards the functional requirements and the non-functional requirements. So take care, and Allah Hafiz.